For God's sake, stop looking like you, for God's sake. Stop looking like you don't belong in your brown skin. I nodded silently, feeling the familiar sting of her words cut through the celebratory atmosphere. The string quartet played softly in the background as guests mingled around elegant floral arrangements that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Amanda Shaw Patel looked stunning in her emerald silk dress, her blonde hair perfectly styled, every inch the picture of old money sophistication. I mean it, Raj, she continued, her voice low but venomous. These are important people. Don't embarrass me like you did at the charity gala. I started walking toward the bathroom, needing a moment to collect myself, but Amanda grabbed my arm with surprising force. Her manicured nails dug into my skin as she steered me toward where the photographer was setting up for family portraits. Actually, let's get this over with, she muttered, then raised her voice to address the photographer. We're doing family photos now, just family. My cousin Sarah beamed as she gathered her relatives, still glowing in her wedding dress. Come on, everyone. Big family shot first. I stepped forward naturally, but Amanda's hand shot out to block me. Family only, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Not whatever you are. The photographer, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, hesitated visibly. Her camera lowered slightly as she glanced between Amanda and me, clearly uncomfortable. The chatter around us died down as people began to notice the tension. Amanda, I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm family too. She laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the awkward silence. By marriage, maybe, but this is about blood family, real family. My cousin Sarah's face flushed red. Amanda, that's completely inappropriate. Raj is absolutely family. It's fine, I said quickly, not wanting to ruin Sarah's special day. I'll just wait over here. But the damage was done. I could feel the stares, hear the whispered conversations starting up around us. Amanda's satisfied smirk told me this had been intentional, calculated to humiliate me in front of people I cared about. The photographer cleared her throat uncomfortably. Perhaps we could do a few different groupings? Include everyone who wants to be included? No, Amanda said firmly. Just blood relatives. That's what we're paying for. I walked away, my face burning with shame and anger. Behind me, I could hear Sarah arguing with Amanda, but I didn't turn back. I found a quiet corner near the bar and ordered a whiskey. Neat. The bartender, an older black man with sympathetic eyes, slid the glass across to me. Rough night? You could say that. I took a sip, feeling the burn slide down my throat. Been married long? He asked, polishing a glass. 18 months. Sometimes it feels like 18 years. He nodded knowingly. Some folks marry for love. Others marry for other reasons. Usually pretty obvious which is which. I looked back toward the photo area, where Amanda was posing with Sarah's family, her arm around Sarah's waist like they were best friends. Like she hadn't just insulted the bride's cousin at her own wedding. Yeah, I said quietly. It's becoming pretty obvious. The reception continued around me, but I felt detached from it all. I watched Amanda work the room, charming Sarah's relatives, laughing at their jokes, playing the perfect wife when anyone important was watching. But I caught the looks she shot me when she thought no one was paying attention. Cold, calculating, full of contempt. Later that night, we rode home in silence. Amanda stared out the passenger window of our BMW, scrolling through her phone. I focused on driving, trying to process what had happened, trying to understand how my marriage had become this toxic. We lived in Amanda's family home in Beacon Hill, a 4-story brownstone that had been in the Shaw family for 3 generations. Everything about it screamed old money, from the original hardwood floors to the oil paintings of long-dead Shaw ancestors lining the hallways. I'd never felt comfortable there, even after 18 months. It wasn't my home, I was just living in it. Amanda made that clear in 100 small ways every day. I was heading upstairs to bed when I heard Amanda's voice from the living room. She was on speakerphone, and her tone was completely different. Relaxed, conspiratorial, cruel. Oh my God, you guys, you should have seen his face, she was saying, laughing. When I told him family only, I thought he was going to cry right there in front of everyone. I froze on the stairs, my hand gripping the banister. Amanda, that's so mean, came a voice I recognized, as her college roommate, Jessica. It's not mean, it's honest, Amanda replied. He looked so pathetic during our vows. He had no idea what he was getting into, None of them ever do. None of who? Asked another voice. Chloe, Amanda's work friend. You know, these diversity hires who think marrying up makes them equal. It's actually kind of sad how grateful his family was that I chose him. The laughter that followed felt like ice water in my veins. I stood there in the darkness of the stairway, listening to my wife mock not just me, but my entire family, my heritage, everything I was. So what's the long-term plan? Jessica asked. You can't keep this up forever. I don't have to, Amanda said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. I'm using his connections to build my client base. His law firm opened doors I never could have accessed otherwise. Once I make partner at my firm, I'll have everything I need. Then she made it sound like she was cutting something. Clean break. Divorce on grounds of irreconcilable differences. What about the prenup? Chloe asked. What prenup? He was so desperate to marry me, he signed whatever I put in front of him. Plus, I'll claim emotional misuse. Say he was controlling, isolated me from friends and family. Who's going to believe the angry brown guy over the sweet white girl? More laughter. I felt sick. You're terrible, Jessica said, but she was giggling. Remind me never to get on your bad side. The best part is, he actually thinks I love him. It's almost too easy. I walked quietly to the bathroom and closed the door. In the mirror, my reflection looked tired, older than my 36 years. I'd always prided myself on being smart, on being able to read people. I was a civil rights attorney, for God's sake. I made my living understanding discrimination, manipulation, misuse of power. How had I been so blind to what was happening in my own marriage? I splashed cold water on my face and dried it with one of Amanda's monogrammed towels. AS, not ASP. She'd never taken my name, never even hyphenated. Another sign I'd missed. But as I stared at myself in that mirror, something shifted. The hurt was still there, the humiliation still burned, but underneath it all, I felt something else growing. Determination. Amanda thought I was pathetic. She thought I was some grateful diversity hire who'd be easy to discard when she was done with me. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. I smiled at my reflection and dried my eyes. Then I went to bed, my mind already working, already planning. A week later, when Amanda showed up crying at my door, she would get a surprise she never expected. The next morning, Amanda left early for her marketing job at Whitmore and Associates, one of Boston's most prestigious firms. She kissed my cheek absently, the same way she might pat a dog, and reminded me that we had dinner with her parents that evening. Try to dress appropriately, she said, not looking up from her phone. And please don't bring up any of your social justice cases. Daddy finds them tedious. After she left, I sat in our kitchen, her kitchen, drinking coffee and thinking. The morning light streaming through the tall windows illuminated the space beautifully, highlighting the marble countertops and custom cabinetry that Amanda's father had paid for. Everything in this house was a reminder that I didn't belong, that I was here on borrowed time and borrowed money. But I wasn't the same man who'd been humiliated at that wedding. That conversation I'd overheard had changed something fundamental in me. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recording app. Then I called my office and told them I'd be working from home for the morning. I had some research to do. As a civil rights attorney at Morrison, Blake & Associates, I specialized in discrimination cases. I knew how to build a case, how to gather evidence, how to document patterns of misuse. I'd done it for hundreds of clients over the years. Time to do it for myself. I started with our joint accounts, printing out statements that showed how Amanda had been systematically using my income to fund her lifestyle while contributing almost nothing herself. Her salary was decent, but she spent it on clothes, spa treatments, and girls' trips while I covered the mortgage, utilities, and groceries. Next, I went through her laptop. Amanda was careless with technology, always leaving herself logged into social media and email. What I found made my stomach turn. Email after email to her parents, detailing her exit strategy. Messages to friends mocking my culture, my family, my appearance. A particularly vicious thread with her sister about how ethnic men were so desperate for white approval that they made perfect temporary husbands. I screenshot everything, saved it to a secure cloud account she didn't know about. But the real treasure trove was her text messages, months of conversations with Chloe, Jessica, and others, laying out her plan in excruciating detail. How she'd been using my professional connections to land clients, how she planned to claim misuse if I fought the divorce. how she'd already consulted a lawyer about getting spousal support. One message thread with Chloe from just 2 weeks ago made my hands shake. Amanda. Had lunch with the Hendersons today. Raj's referral, they're signing a $200,000 contract next week. Chloe. Nice. How much longer do you think you need? Amanda. Maybe 6 more months? I want to lock in the Morrison account first. Once I have that, I'll be set for partner track. Then bye-bye, brown boy. Chloe. LOL, you're evil. What if he fights it? Amanda. With what? I've been documenting everything. How he isolates me from my family, how he's controlling about money, how he has anger issues about race. Classic misuser profile. No one will question it. I had to put the phone down and walk away. The calculation was breathtaking. She hadn't just married me for convenience. She'd married me as part of an elaborate con game. But Amanda had made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed I was too grateful, too desperate, too pathetic to fight back. She was wrong. I spent the rest of the morning documenting everything. I found the wedding photographer's contact information and called her, explaining that I was putting together a photo album, and wondered if she remembered the family photo situation. She did, and she was still uncomfortable about it. I've been photographing weddings for 20 years, she said. I've never had someone exclude a family member like that. It was unusual. Would you be willing to write a brief statement about what you witnessed? I asked. For personal records? She agreed. I called Sarah next. My cousin was still angry about what had happened. I can't believe Amanda did that to you, she said. It was so cruel, so unnecessary. Everyone was talking about it after you left. I'm documenting some things about our relationship, I told her carefully. Would you be willing to write down what you remember from that night? Absolutely. Raj, I hope you know that was completely unacceptable. Your family, period. By lunchtime, I had statements from 3 witnesses, screenshots of dozens of text messages and emails, financial records showing the pattern of exploitation, and recordings of Amanda's phone conversations that I'd started making weeks ago when I first began to suspect something was wrong. But I wasn't done. Not even close. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I used my professional resources for personal business. I called Tony Martinez, a private investigator who'd worked on several of my cases. I need you to look into someone, I told him, discreetly. Personal matter? Very personal. Tony was good at his job. Within 48 hours, he had Amanda's complete employment history, her college transcripts, her dating history, and most importantly, evidence of her current activities. The photos he showed me were devastating. Amanda leaving expensive restaurants with her boss, Brian Whitmore. Amanda entering Brian's downtown condo. Amanda shopping with credit cards that weren't in her name or mine. Your wife's been busy, Tony said, sliding the folder across my desk. This Brian Whitmore guy, he's married too, by the way. 3 kids. Wife doesn't know. I stared at the photos. Amanda laughing with Brian over champagne. Amanda's hand on his thigh in his car. Amanda wearing a necklace I'd never seen before, one that clearly cost more than I made in a month. How long, I asked. Based on what I could document, at least 8 months, probably longer. 8 months. We'd only been married 18 months total. She'd been cheating on me for almost half our marriage. There's more, Tony said. I did some digging into her employment situation. This Whitmore guy? He's not just her boss. He's the senior partner's son. Word around the office is that Amanda's been promised a fast track to partner in exchange for services rendered. I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. What kind of services? The kind that got her 3 major accounts in the last 6 months. All of them referrals from your law firm, by the way. She's been using your professional reputation to build her client base, then using her relationship with Whitmore to secure deals that other associates can't touch. It was worse than I'd thought. Amanda wasn't just using me personally. She was using my professional reputation to advance her career, while simultaneously destroying it through her behavior. That evening, I sat through dinner with Amanda's parents, Edward and Patricia Shaw. They treated me with the same polite condescension they always had, asking about my work and the tone people use when discussing something mildly distasteful. Still doing that civil rights work? Edward asked, cutting his steak with surgical precision. Must be fulfilling. Very. I said. I'm working on a particularly interesting case right now. Involves systematic discrimination and fraud. The evidence is quite compelling. Amanda shot me a warning look. Raj doesn't like to talk about work at dinner, she said quickly. Actually, I find it fascinating, Patricia said. What kind of fraud? I smiled. The kind where someone uses another person's reputation and connections for personal gain while simultaneously working to destroy them. Very calculated, very sophisticated. The perpetrator thought they were too smart to get caught. Amanda's fork clattered against her plate. I think that's enough shop talk, she said. But I'm just getting to the interesting part, I continued. See, the perpetrator documented everything themselves. Text messages, emails, recorded conversations. They were so confident they'd never face consequences that they created a perfect evidence trail. Edward leaned forward, interested despite himself. And what happens to someone like that? Well, that depends. If it's just personal fraud, they might face civil liability, but if it involves professional misconduct, violation of ethical standards, breach of fiduciary duty, I shrugged. Career destruction, public humiliation, financial ruin, the works. Amanda excused herself to use the bathroom. I could hear her being sick. Sounds like a fascinating case, Patricia said. I do hope justice is served. Oh, it will be, I assured her. It definitely will be. When we got home that night, Amanda was quiet, subdued. She went to bed early, claiming a headache. I stayed up late, organizing my evidence files, preparing for what came next. Tomorrow, I would start making phone calls. To Amanda's clients, to her employer's ethics board, to Brian Whitmore's wife. Amanda thought she was smart, thought she'd planned for every contingency. She'd forgotten one crucial detail. I was smarter. 3 days later, Amanda's carefully constructed world began to crumble. I was in my office at Morrison Blake and Associates when my secretary buzzed me. Mr. Patel, there's a Mrs. Jennifer Whitmore here to see you. She says it's urgent. Jennifer Whitmore was exactly what I'd expected. Elegant, well-dressed, the kind of woman who'd been raised to handle crisis with grace. But her hands were shaking as she sat across from my desk. Mr. Patel, I received some information yesterday that I think you should know about. She opened her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. These are photos of my husband with your wife. I looked through the pictures Tony had taken, keeping my expression neutral. I see. May I ask how you obtained these? Someone sent them to me anonymously, along with some other materials. She handed me another envelope. Text messages between your wife and her friends, discussing her relationship with Brian, and discussing you. I read through the printed text conversations, seeing my humiliation laid out in black and white for a stranger to witness. Jennifer watched my face carefully. Sorry you had to see those, she said quietly. No one deserves to be spoken about that way. Thank you for bringing this to me, I said. What do you plan to do about your husband? Her smile was sharp as glass. Brian thinks he's untouchable because his father owns the firm. He's about to learn otherwise. I've already spoken to my lawyer about divorce proceedings, and I've scheduled a meeting with the firm's board of directors. The board? Brian's been using company resources to conduct his affair. Company credit cards, company car, company apartment. That's embezzlement. The board takes a very dim view of partners who steal from the firm to fund their extramarital activities. I felt a surge of admiration for Jennifer Whitmore. Into your wife's client acquisitions, into your wife's client acquisitions. Several of her major accounts came through referrals from your firm, correct? That's right. And she's been representing herself as having more experience and credentials than she actually possesses. I have documentation showing she's been inflating her resume, claiming credit for work done by other associates, even forging references. This was news to me. How did you discover that? I have friends at other firms. When I started asking questions about Amanda Shaw, some interesting information surfaced. Your wife has been very busy building her reputation on lies. Jennifer stood to leave, then paused at the door. Mr. Patel, I want you to know that what Brian and your wife did, it's not just infidelity, it's professional misconduct of the highest order. They used their positions, their access to confidential information, and company resources to conduct their affair and advance her career illegally. After she left, I sat in my office staring out at Boston Harbor, processing what I'd learned. Amanda's betrayal was even more extensive than I'd realized. She hadn't just been cheating, she'd been committing professional fraud, using my reputation to enable her criminal behavior. My phone rang. Amanda. Raj, we need to talk, she said without preamble. Can you come home now? I'm in the middle of. Now, Raj, it's important. I found Amanda pacing in our living room like a caged animal. Her usually perfect appearance was disheveled, her makeup smeared. She'd been crying. Sit down, she said. Please. I remained standing. What's this about, Amanda? Someone's been spreading lies about me at work. Vicious, horrible lies. They're saying I've been having an affair, that I've been falsifying client information, that I've been using company resources inappropriately. Have you? The question hung in the air between us. Amanda's face went through a series of expression: surprise, anger, calculation, and finally, a kind of desperate cunning. How can you even ask me that? I'm your wife. Are you? I pulled out my phone and opened the recording app. Because based on what I overheard last week, you seem to think this marriage is temporary. A business arrangement that you plan to terminate once you've extracted maximum value. Her face went white. You were eavesdropping on a private conversation. In my own home, on a speakerphone conversation where you mocked me, my family, and our marriage to your friends. I hit play on one of the recordings I'd made since then. Amanda's voice filled the room, laughing about how pathetic I'd looked at our wedding, how grateful my family had been that she'd chosen me. Amanda lunged for my phone, but I stepped back. There's more, I said. Months of text messages, emails to your parents about your exit strategy, photos of you with Brian Whitmore, financial records showing how you've been using my income and professional connections while planning to destroy my reputation in divorce proceedings. She sank onto the couch, her face in her hands. Raj, please, let me explain. Explain what? How you married me as part of an elaborate con game? How you've been committing professional fraud using my reputation? How you've been planning to falsely accuse me of misuse to cover your tracks? It wasn't supposed to be like this, she whispered. It started as, a practical arrangement. But then I thought maybe what? Maybe you could learn to love the diversity higher? Maybe you could overcome your obvious disgust for my race, my family, my very existence? She looked up at me, and for a moment I saw something that might have been genuine remorse. But then her expression hardened, and I saw the real Amanda. Cold, calculating, ruthless. You can't prove any of this, she said. It's all circumstantial, hearsay. And even if you could, who's going to believe you over me? The angry minority husband trying to destroy his innocent white wife? I smiled. You know what, Amanda? You're absolutely right. A year ago, maybe even a month ago, that strategy might have worked. But you made one crucial mistake. What's that? You assumed I was working alone. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it and smiled wider. That's my signal. There's someone here who wants to meet you. The doorbell rang. Amanda looked confused as I went to answer it, but her confusion turned to horror when she saw who I'd invited. Jennifer Whitmore stood on our doorstep, no longer the composed woman from my office. She looked like an avenging angel, beautiful and terrible in her fury. Mrs. Shaw Patel, Jennifer said, stepping into our foyer. We need to talk. Amanda tried to run, actually tried to push past Jennifer and flee her own home. But Jennifer was ready for her, blocking the doorway with surprising strength. Sit down, Jennifer commanded, and something in her voice made Amanda obey. Jennifer opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Let's discuss your relationship with my husband, shall we? And your systematic fraud against multiple clients, and your theft of proprietary information from Whitmore and Associates. I don't know what you're talking about, Amanda said weakly. Really? Because I have security footage of you accessing Brian's office after hours, copying files from accounts you weren't authorized to handle. I have records of you using company credit cards for personal expenses. I have testimony from 3 different clients that you misrepresented your credentials and experience. Jennifer spread photos across our coffee table like playing cards. And then there are these. You and Brian in compromising positions, in company locations, using company time. That's not just infidelity, Mrs. Shaw Patel. That's embezzlement, fraud, and theft. Amanda stared at the evidence of her downfall, her face cycling through emotions too quickly to track. What do you want? She finally whispered. Jennifer smiled, and it was terrifying. Justice for both of us. She turned to me. Mr. Patel, I believe you had some information to share as well? I opened my own folder. Amanda, meet the evidence that's going to destroy your career, your reputation, and your freedom. For the next hour, Jennifer and I laid out Amanda's crimes in excruciating detail. The professional fraud, the systematic theft, the elaborate con game she'd been running on me, her plans to falsely accuse me of misuse, her racist communications about me and my family. By the end, Amanda was sobbing. Please, she kept saying, please, I'll do anything. I'll disappear. I'll never bother either of you again. Too late for that, Jennifer said crisply. The board meets tomorrow morning. The ethics committee has already been notified, and Mr. Patel has filed formal complaints with the State Bar Association. I looked at my wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, crumpled on our expensive couch in our expensive house that her father had bought, surrounded by evidence of her own destruction. Amanda, I said quietly, you asked who would believe me over you. Turns out, when you have enough evidence, when you have enough witnesses, when you have enough documentation of systematic fraud and misuse, everyone believes the truth. Jennifer stood to leave, and Mrs. Shaw Patel, you'll be hearing from multiple lawyers in the coming days. I suggest you find good representation. You're going to need it. After Jennifer left, Amanda and I sat in silence for a long time. Finally, she looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. How long have you known? About the affair, about the fraud, or about the fact that you're a racist sociopath who married me as part of an elaborate scam? She flinched. All of it. Long enough to document everything. Long enough to build an airtight case. Long enough to make sure that when you fall hard. I loved you, she said desperately. At least I thought I did sometimes. I stood up. No, Amanda. You loved what I could do for you. You loved my connections, my reputation, my usefulness. You never loved me. You barely saw me as human. I walked toward the door, then turned back. By the way, you should probably call your parents. Jennifer's meeting with the board tomorrow includes a presentation about how Whitmore and Associates has been systematically defrauding clients with your help. Some of those clients are your father's business associates. He's going to have some explaining to do. Amanda's face went ashen. You didn't. I did. See, Amanda, you taught me something important. You taught me that sometimes, to get real justice, you have to be willing to burn everything down. I left her there, sobbing in the ruins of her carefully constructed lies. The next morning, I woke up in a hotel room and smiled. It was going to be a beautiful day. The news broke 3 days later. Whitmore and Associates under investigation for systematic client fraud. Read the headline in the Boston Business Journal. The article detailed how senior partner Brian Whitmore and marketing associate Amanda Shaw had been using company resources to conduct an affair while simultaneously defrauding clients through misrepresentation and embezzlement. I read it over coffee in my new apartment, a modest place in Cambridge, but it was mine, paid for with my own money, decorated with my own choices. No more marble countertops bought with Shaw family money. No more oil paintings of dead white ancestors staring down at me with disapproval. My phone had been ringing constantly. Reporters wanting comments, colleagues expressing shock and support, and most surprisingly, several new clients who'd heard about my role in exposing the fraud and wanted representation for their own discrimination cases. You've become something of a folk hero, my partner James Morrison told me when I arrived at the office. The lawyer who took down the system that was exploiting him. It's a powerful story. I just documented the truth, I said. Amanda did the rest herself. But privately, I felt a satisfaction deeper than any professional victory I'd ever achieved. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again. Not the grateful diversity hire Amanda had made me feel like. Not the outsider trying to fit into spaces where I wasn't wanted. Just myself. The formal hearings began the following week. I sat in the State Bar Association's conference room, watching Amanda squirm under questioning about her professional conduct. She'd hired expensive lawyers, probably with her parents' money, but there was no defending against the mountain of evidence I'd assembled. Mrs. Shaw, the lead investigator, said, "Can you explain these text messages where you discuss using your husband's professional connections to secure clients under false pretenses?" Amanda's lawyer whispered something in her ear. I invoke my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. In these emails to your parents discussing your plan to falsely accuse your husband of misuse in divorce proceedings. Fifth Amendment. In this recorded conversation where you use racial slurs to describe your husband and his family. Amanda's composure finally cracked. Those were private conversations. He had no right to record them. Her lawyer tried to stop her, but Amanda was beyond reason now. You don't understand what it was like, being married to him, having to pretend to care about his causes, his people, his pathetic need for acceptance. Mrs. Shaw, the investigator interrupted, I think you've said enough. But Amanda couldn't stop. Months of suppressed hatred came pouring out in a racist tirade that was being recorded by court reporters and witnessed by a room full of legal professionals. She called me every slur she'd apparently been thinking for 18 months, described my family in terms that made the stenographer visibly uncomfortable, and detailed her sacrifice in marrying beneath her social class. When she finally finished, the room was silent, except for the sound of typing, as the court reporter finished transcribing her career self-destruction. I think we have everything we need, the investigator said quietly. The ethics board's decision was unanimous. Amanda Shaw was disbarred, banned from practicing law in Massachusetts, and referred for criminal prosecution on charges of fraud and embezzlement. The board also issued a formal censure of her conduct that would follow her to any state where she might try to practice law in the future. But the professional consequences were just the beginning. Jennifer Whitmore had been busy. Her divorce from Brian was proceeding swiftly, and she'd managed to freeze most of their joint assets pending investigation of his embezzlement. More importantly, she'd used her social connections that were apparently more extensive and powerful than Brian had realized, to ensure that Amanda's racist rants were circulated widely among Boston's legal and business communities. Amanda Shaw became a cautionary tale, a byword for professional misconduct and personal toxicity. Her name was mentioned in ethics seminars as an example of how not to conduct oneself as a lawyer. The criminal trial was almost anticlimactic. Faced with overwhelming evidence and no credible defense, Amanda pled guilty to multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement in exchange for a reduced sentence. She got 18 months in minimum security prison, 5 years probation, and an order to pay restitution to the clients she'd defrauded. But the real punishment was social. Amanda's parents, Edward and Patricia Shaw, found themselves persona non grata in the circles they'd moved in for decades. Their daughter's crimes had embarrassed powerful people, cost them money, and exposed them to liability. The Shaw family name, once synonymous with respectability and influence, became associated with scandal and fraud. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Edward Shaw's business suffered significant losses as clients pulled their accounts. Patricia Shaw resigned from several charity boards after other board members made it clear she was no longer welcome. The family that had looked down on me for my race, my background, my otherness, found themselves on the outside looking in. There was a certain poetic justice in that. 6 months after Amanda's sentencing, I was working late in my office when my secretary buzzed me. Mr. Patel, there's someone here to see you. She says it's personal. I looked up to see Amanda standing in my doorway. Prison had changed her. She was thinner, paler. Her once perfect appearance replaced by the look of someone who'd learned hard lessons about consequences. Hello, Raj, she said quietly. Amanda, I gestured to the chair across from my desk. I have to say I'm surprised to see you. She sat down carefully, like someone who'd learned not to make sudden movements. I wanted to apologize before I leave Boston, before I try to start over somewhere else. Apologize for what, specifically? The fraud, the racism, the systematic emotional misuse, or just the fact that you got caught? She flinched. All of it. I know you have no reason to believe me, but I've had time to think about what I did, who I was. Prison has a way of forcing self-reflection. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation, for the calculating expression that had become so familiar. But Amanda looked genuinely broken, genuinely remorseful. I was raised to believe I was better than other people, she continued. Better than you, specifically. My parents, their friends, everyone in my world reinforced the idea that people like you were less than, that you should be grateful for any attention from people like us. And now? Now I understand that I was the one who was less than, less honest, less honorable, less human. She wiped her eyes with a tissue. I destroyed my own life, and I almost destroyed yours. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did was wrong. I leaned back in my chair, processing this conversation I'd never expected to have. What will you do now? I don't know. I can't practice law anywhere. My family has disowned me. I have no friends, no career, no future that I can see. She stood up. But I suppose that's what I deserve? She walked to the door, then turned back. For what it's worth, Raj, you were a better husband than I deserved. You were a better person than I ever was. I hope someday you can find someone who sees that. After she left, I sat in my office thinking about the conversation. There was a time when I would have felt sorry for Amanda, when I would have been tempted to offer help or forgiveness. But that man, the grateful, accommodating man who'd accepted crumbs of affection from someone who despised him, was gone. I'd learned something important about myself through this experience. I'd learned that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, smarter than my enemies had assumed, and more valuable than the people who'd tried to diminish me had ever understood. My practice was thriving. The publicity from Amanda's case had brought me dozens of new clients, people who'd suffered discrimination and needed an advocate, who understood what it felt like to be underestimated and misused. I'd hired 2 associates and was considering opening a second office. More importantly, I'd started dating again. Sarah, not my cousin Sarah, but Dr. Sarah Chen, a brilliant physician I'd met at a legal conference, was everything Amanda had never been. Kind, genuine, respectful, someone who saw my heritage as part of what made me interesting, rather than something to be tolerated or overcome. When I told Sarah about my marriage, about what Amanda had done, she'd been horrified. How could someone treat another person that way? She'd asked. Especially someone they claimed to love? She never loved me, I'd explained. She loved what I could do for her. There's a difference. Sarah had taken my hand. Well, she was an idiot. Her loss is definitely my gain. That evening, I drove to my cousin Sarah's house for dinner. She and her husband Mike had become my closest family since the divorce. The people who'd stood by me through the worst of it. You look good, Sarah said as she hugged me. Happy, really happy. I am happy, I realized as I said it. For the first time in years, I'm actually happy. Over dinner, Mike raised his glass in a toast to Raj, who showed us all that sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to let terrible people make you feel terrible about yourself. And to Amanda, Sarah added with a wicked grin, who learned that when you try to destroy someone, you better make sure they're actually destroyable. We laughed, and I felt the last of my anger toward Amanda dissolve. She'd tried to break me, tried to use me, tried to discard me when she was finished. Instead, she'd made me stronger, more successful, and ultimately happier than I'd ever been. The next week, I got a call from a reporter working on a follow-up story about the Whitmore scandal. Mr. Patel, do you have any final thoughts about your ex-wife's case? Any message you'd like to share? I thought about it for a moment. Just this. Amanda Shaw thought she was smarter than everyone else. Thought she could manipulate and misuse people without consequences. She thought wrong. Actions have consequences, lies eventually surface, and justice, while sometimes slow, is usually inevitable. And how do you feel about her now? I don't, I said honestly. I don't think about her at all anymore. She's irrelevant to my life. After I hung up, I looked around my office, my successful practice built on my own merit, serving clients who respected and valued my work. I thought about Sarah waiting for me at home in our apartment, the home we'd chosen together, decorated with things that reflected both our tastes and backgrounds. I thought about Amanda, somewhere out there trying to rebuild a life from the ashes of her own making, finally understanding what it felt like to be on the outside, to be judged and found wanting, to be dismissed and discarded. And I smiled.